Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. Today we're going to go over the install process to put on these dampeners on the stepper motors. We're going to focus on the X and Y axis. We're not going to put it on the Z axis or the extruder because it's been known to cause issues with stringing and some other complications on printing. So I'm going to just do X and Y, and then from there we'll take some measurements, and I don't think it's actually going to make a big difference if we're trying to put it on the Z axis anyways. It just all depends, I guess. But what we're going to do is first we're going to get a reading just in the room to count for white noise, and then from there I'm going to start a print as is, and then we'll get a measurement at that level while it's printing. From there we're going to start up a print. I'm going to get a decibel reading while it's printing without putting the stepper motors on, so that we kind of know what we're looking at before we do anything. Then we'll go through the install process on the stepper motors, and then we'll get another reading at the end to see what difference, if any, it makes. I'm hoping it makes a big difference, but I want to actually show you with facts the difference it will make versus just saying, yeah, it's going to make a difference. So that's just what my thoughts were there. Alright, so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to start up a print so we can get that first reading. Alright, so before we get started, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. I'm going to go ahead and get my phone here so we can get a ambient noise reading just from the white noise or the background noise. So I'm going to grab that. I'm just using a decibel meter app that I've been using for a while. It's called Decibel X. It works pretty good. You can kind of see it there. But I'll be using that for the recordings. I'll be using the same app, the same phone, so everything will be consistent. So I'm going to stop talking here for like 5 seconds so that we can get a reading, and it'll give us an average. Alright, so I got an average. It was about 5 seconds, so 33.6 is our average. So I'll go ahead and write that down. Alright, so next what we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to go ahead and start up a print. Before we do that, I did want to make a note that there are two different types of pulleys on these stepper motors. We have the ones that are compression fitted, and we have the ones that have an Allen wrench. You can just kind of adjust the pulley head. If you have the one with the Allen wrench or the adjustable pulley head, you won't have to do anything special. You'll just be able to account for the differences in the parts. If not, you're going to have to print these spacers here, and then the install is going to be slightly different. So we'll go over what it looks like if you have the compression fitting here once I get it taken apart. But I think most of the printers that are coming off coming from Creality right now have the compression fittings, so you're probably going to have to print these spacers. I will link to them in the description below, and then along with that you're going to need some screws as well. So I went ahead and picked up this kit. Hopefully it has everything we need, but I will link to that in the description below as well. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start up the printer, get a print going, and then we can take the reading from before. Alright guys, I got the first print started here. We're going to get some measurements. I wanted to at least got into the print so we got a lot of movement going on, because that will affect the sound obviously, because we're getting a lot of sound from the stepper motors and just the movements on the X and Y axis. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking here for a minute. I'll go ahead and record this for like 10 seconds just so we get a good average, and then we'll go ahead and write that down. Alright, so that might have been slightly longer than 10 seconds, but it is what it is. So our average here was 56.9 and a max of 62.3. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. So that means about, what, 23 decibels is from the printer itself, and we're about 6 inches away, so we'll try to measure at the same spot next time. But we're not going to be 100% accurate. We're just trying to get a good baseline for any differences caused by putting these dampeners on. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this print and then get everything set up so that we can start taking things apart. Alright, I went ahead and zoomed in a little bit, and I also raised the Z-axis so that we have a little bit of space to work. And actually, let me power this off. Let me grab my tools out of here. We're going to just need an assortment of Allen wrenches. I've got the standard ones that I've always used. I think it's the 1.5, 2, and a 3mm just for the different sizes. Alright, so we're going to want to loosen these guys up so that we can loosen this belt up. We're going to have to take off this case here so that we can get to the motor behind it. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. I just need to loosen it up just a little bit. Apparently I had these on there pretty tight. Alright, so that should be good. Yeah, so the reason we have to do that is we're going to be shifting it a little bit, so we got to get the pulley around the belt, and if we have all the tension on it, that's not going to work. Alright, so next we want to go ahead and get these screws off, so we have to take this thingy off here. The lovely QR code, and go ahead and take these 4 screws off. Alright, now that we got those 4 screws out, we can go ahead and either just set this off to the side, or you can disconnect this Z motor, the stopper, so it's not in the way, which in this case we want to go ahead and just disconnect it because we're going to have to remove it from this enclosure to put these spacers in. Alright, so once that's off, you can go ahead and pull this around the wheel here, or the pulley, slide the stepper motor out, and then we can disconnect it. Alright, so let's take a look at this stepper motor real quick. You can see here, this pulley doesn't have any adjustments or any way to actually loosen or tighten it. It's press fitted or compression fitted, and you can't make adjustments. So if your printer has the stepper motor set up like this, then you're going to have to print something similar to these. I will link to these below. If you have a pulley where you have a couple Allen wrenches, or bolts below, and you can use an Allen wrench to loosen it up and then kind of adjust where the placement is, then you're good to go. You don't have to worry about printing those, and you'll be able to put it back in the same spot. So what's happening is we're adding a little bit of a space here from these dampeners, and if you don't account for the space, if you can't pull the pulley out here, you're going to be off by pretty much the thickness of the actual dampener, and that's not going to work. Your belt will just be grinding on the side and probably just be a nightmare. It's not even worth playing around with. So now that we got that off, we're going to go ahead and put the first dampener on it. This kit came with 4 of them, and then 4 heat shields, or heat sinks. I guess technically you could use 3 with this setup. Actually, I guess 4 if you wanted to get to the Z-axis. But in most cases, you won't need all of that. It's just the kit came with that, and it was easier to buy the kit than to just try to piece everything out. It wasn't that expensive. I want to say I paid like 16 or 18 bucks for it, and that was with the heat sinks, which when removing the actual stepper motor off of the frame, it's going to be important to put the heat sinks on it, because from what I can tell, the frame itself is acting as a heat sink for the stepper motor because it's directly attached. When you're adding that gap here, there's no way to disperse the heat, so that's why putting on the heat sink is definitely a worthwhile thing, and it's 2 seconds to do. Alright, so let's go ahead and put this on here. Alright, so let's get these screws out. Now, there are... So I was focusing on that. 2 of these are threaded and 2 of them are not. We're going to want to put the non-threaded ones on the motor itself first. So we'll go ahead and do that. Because we're going to need these threaded ones later on. If you're actually mounting it here, that's going to be critical because that's what it's actually connecting to. So just make sure that you're not using the threaded holes on the actual motor itself. Now the orientation I don't think matters. And it's worth mentioning that these things are a little bit greasy, so it's kind of hard to work with them a little bit just because you're sliding all around. It's just the grease that they put on it from the factory, I'm assuming. Alright, so we want to get these nice and snug, and actually that's not the right size. You're going to be using the 1.5 millimeter on this, or 2. Oh, there's the other Allen wrench. Alright, so now that we got this on, if you were able to adjust the pulley and you took it off, you can go ahead and slide it back on there and kind of loosely fit it, and you'll go ahead and put this back on the same way you took it off. You're just going to align the pulley with where the belt is and then tighten it in place, and then you'll use the 2 screws that'll provide it with the kit to go here and here to hold it in place. If you have the compression fitting like I do here, we're going to have to modify it a little bit, and we're going to use this. It's going to basically go here. We're going to put the motor on like this, and I guess this is kind of a bad angle, but when we're doing that, we're going to make sure that we get the belt on the pulley, and then we'll run the screws through the back into those 2 areas. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. It does leave this side open so that if you are putting the pulley on, you can actually work in there a little bit. I will get a better angle on this in a couple minutes. But pretty much the belt is just straight and it's sitting on the pulley. That's the important part. Now we've got to use the 25mm M3 bolts that we bought for this setting, for the setup here. So it's going to align with the 2 holes that were threaded. So we're just going to run this through and go ahead and screw it in place. I just want to get both sides started, and then I will tighten them. This back one is a little bit more tricky to do, just because there's other pieces in the way, but it's not too bad. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and grab this so we can tighten them. Again, this is just the 2mm Allen wrench. Alright, now we can go ahead and run our cable. Now if you have really tight cables, you might have to make some adjustments. I actually put this on the bottom here. I figured that would be a little bit easier to just run the cable up, under and then up, versus having it stick out of the side, but it would technically work either way. Alright, so there's that. Alright, sorry about that. I had to go run and grab a screwdriver. We need to remove this stopper from the old enclosure. Alright, so we went ahead and took off the stopper. It will basically go here like so. We just got to run these screws through here. Okay, I think I can get this. Let me see here. Trying to figure out which size works the best. Might be able to get away with the 8mm. No. Okay, so let's go ahead and use the 12mm ones here. These heads are a little bit large, so just kind of space it so that you can get it in, then we'll tighten it. This probably would have been better to do before we put everything together, which means I'm going to have to take this back off. Alright, so keep that in mind. Put that on first. I've never installed it with these spacers before, so this is kind of a little learning curve for both of us, or all of us here. Alright, so this part is going to be sitting up there like this. So we've got the opening facing the belt. So we will just go ahead and put this on here. Hopefully not drop the screws in the process. Just be careful. These are a little bit too big at the head part, so it is going to scrape. And then they've got the openings here for these nuts that fit this screw. If you can use them, great. If not, it might have to push them all the way through. These don't quite fit these nuts. It's a little bit too small, so we'll have to work around it. Alright, and then these are already going to be tight enough when they go through, so unless it's really loose, I wouldn't worry about trying to tighten down the nut itself. I can't move these by hand at this point, so it's going to be more than enough to hold it. So now that we got that in, we can go ahead and just do the process we did before. Go ahead and feed this. I'll knock these screws back out so I can work here. Going to put the motor through and then connect the pulley to the motor. Make sure we're straight, which we are, and then we'll go ahead and put these screws back in. All right, those are in tight. Now we'll just go ahead and plug in this stopper. All right, so last thing for this guy, I'm gonna go ahead and put the heat sink on. So we just gotta take off the backing on this and just center it as much as we can, and then just push. And that's good to go. All right, now we are going to tighten this back up really quick, and then we're going to move to the Y-axis. So let me turn this. I believe it's this one. All right, that's good and tight, and I can move this smoothly, so we should be good to go there. All right, guys, before we moved on, I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about a couple items here. As you can see from the install process we just went over, I only used 2 bolts, and I just ran them through and connected them directly to the dampener. Another way to install this would be to connect the actual bracket to the frame first with the 4 bolts. Just make sure that you have enough of a space here to work with. And then this would turn a little bit, and then you can actually connect it here and here for the dampeners. So this would be turned. I didn't like that. I think that this will work just fine. It's completely solid, and I'm not completely depending on the plastic here, where we will have to on the Y dampener. So I like this, but there are other ways to do it, so just keep that in mind. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video that we will have to do is we're going to have to update the firmware. So if you're not on a custom version of the firmware, go ahead and check out the video I did on that. I'll link to it below. But you will have to be on a custom version of the Marlin firmware to be able to do this, because you've got to switch the firmware to tell it that the motor's switched, unless it's going to think that it's going the opposite direction than it really is. All right, so next let's go and unplug this so we can get to the Y-axis. This one is going to be a little bit easier. It's just the one piece here. So we've got to do the same thing. We've got to go up to the front here. I guess I'm going to turn it back around so I can show you. We have to loosen this up so that we can push this in, so we can basically take the tension off of the pulley. So I'm assuming it's going to be this one again. Yeah, we just need to loosen it a little bit. Then with that, we can kind of slide it around. So pushing it in, so we're taking the tension off. We'll go back to this side. We've got 4 screws holding this in. We got to go and remove those. All right, so we got that out. Just going to disconnect the power here. All right, guys, I think I ended up redoing this Y-axis like 5 times before I figured out the best way to get it to stay and work well. I will say overall, I am not completely thrilled with these spacers. I will look for other ones and probably do another video on swapping them out. I don't like them. Maybe they were meant for the Ender 3, not the Ender 3 Pro, but here we are. So what I ended up doing was, oops, forgot I was plugged in. I put a pretty much 2 nuts and a washer on this side, and then a washer and nut on this side, just to get the spacing right. This ended up being 0.32 inches, so you can really do any combination of washers, spacers, or nuts, or whatever you end up using that you would like. Just make sure you add about the 0.32. You can offset it a little bit. If you go up to like 0.35 or whatever, that would be fine as well. And then this I just put on this side, just to make sure that when I'm pulling it in, it's not actually angling the stepper motor and pulling the plastic. But like I said, I will look for some other options on spacers and probably do another video, but you can make it work with this. So what I ended up doing is I used the 4 screws that came off of the X-axis. They're a really good length that allowed me to pretty much not have to worry about mounting the stepper motor, the dampener to the stepper motor and then attaching it. I was able to just run everything through, and then I've got all 4 of them going into the stepper, so that way we've got a good connection, so there's not going to be any movement. This is pretty solid. Now, there's 2 more things I wanted to point out, which I'm not a huge fan of, but we had to do anyway. Let me unplug this so I can turn this around. One is, well, I tried to cut some of the plastic here to see if I can get the y-axis to go back further, because I was hitting here initially, but that ended up not being the only part it was hitting. There's a metal part here on the actual bottom side of the bed that was hitting the stepper motor. So I ended up having to move the stopper for the y-axis up probably, I don't know, about 5 millimeters, maybe a little bit more. You can see it's not really too far out, but I am losing a tad bit of bed space as a result here. And then on the same note, if you're using the BL Touch and you have this I guess modified fan cover, I don't know if it's going to be the same case if you're just using the standard mount for the BL Touch, but I had to put some extra padding on here because basically it was coming over and the plastic was hitting the stepper before it was engaging the stopper, so that was a problem as well. So I just put 2 felt pieces on here. I'll end up replacing it with a thicker rubber piece. I'll link to that one in the description below, but it works fine with this, but I do want to replace it with the rubber pieces. So really losing a tad bit of build volume on a little bit on the x-axis, a tad bit more on the y-axis. If you're not trying to get every single inch out of this bed, it's not going to be an issue. But if you are, you might want to think about whether or not you want to go this route or not. All right, so let's go back to the y-axis really quick. I wanted to go to put this on the heat block. I waited till we got back on film so I can do that. So I'll just go ahead and pop that on there, and then that's gonna help disperse the heat off of the actual stepper motor, because they can get pretty hot without it, and then when you're taking it off of the frame, it has no way to disperse the heat. So I would highly recommend using these heat shields or heat blocks. Alright, so now I think we got everything back together. I did tighten this, sorry about moving this back and forth. I went ahead and tightened up the belt off camera because I was working on that. And again, sorry that I did end up finishing this part up on the y-axis off camera. Like I said, there was a lot of back and forth, so I wanted to get it to a good point before I continued recording, because I think I had like 5 takes of like, let's try this, and yeah, it was just a nightmare. Alright, now let's jump over to the computer so we can update the firmware. Remember, if we don't update the firmware, it's going to think these steppers are reversed, or the way that they were before on both the X and Y axis, and basically it won't work. It's going to just try to run it off that side if you're trying to home the X axis, as an example. So we've got to jump over to the firmware and just go ahead and modify. It's really just 2 lines, and then push it to the printer. So we'll go ahead and do that really quick, and then we'll come back and start a print, and we'll see what our final noise or decibel readings are to see if all of this actually made a difference. I'm hoping it did. It was a decent bit of effort, but if I can actually get it to the point where I can have this running in the background while I'm on a conference call or something for work, that would be awesome, which is why I started down this path. Alright guys, we're at the computer now. I've got the Ender 3 plugged in, so let's go to make sure that we're seeing it. It should be under COM 8, so yes, we're good. Alright, we've got to switch the orientation of the motors so that it's going the right direction, because right now we kind of flipped them, so it thinks if it was to try to move left, it'd actually be going right. So we've got to tell the firmware that it was switched. So if we go to configuration.backend, I guess I should start with, I did a video covering the Arduino IDE and how to install Marlin on your Ender 3 or Ender 3 Pro, or really most of the Creality printers. If you haven't already done that, you're going to want to check out that video first. I'll link to that in the description below. But assuming that you already have that done and you are running the Marlin firmware, if you go to the configuration underscore backend.h file and we search for Ender 3, that will take us to where we need to go, and then we need to find the motor areas and tell it to reverse. So here you'll see invert X direction and invert Y direction. We got to switch those from true to false. Just a really simple change, just those two lines, and then we'll go ahead and push it to the printer. So we'll just go over to upload. And again, I know I'm not covering this in too much detail here. I think this video is already going to be long enough as it is, but I did cover all of this in more detail in a different video that I will link to below. Alright, it looks like it is going through. This should finish up here shortly. If you get any type of access denied or anything like that, I've had it happen before, just go ahead and reboot the computer. Alright, that looks good, so it went ahead and sent everything, so we are good. Now we're going to go ahead and jump over to the area we were working at before, where we were doing the physical part install, and go ahead and start up a print and see how big of a difference, if any, these things actually did make. So let's go ahead and try that. If you guys haven't already, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. It'll really help make this channel grow. Thank you. Alright guys, everything's running now. Let's go to do a quick test and see where we ended up at. Alright, the other fan just kicked in, which wasn't there when we were doing the initial test. That fan is from the power supply. But even with that fan kicking in, which is quite a bit louder, it brought the average to 56.3, so just 0.6 decibels lower. But before that fan kicked in, let me just write that down. Before that extra fan kicked in, we were sitting at 49.5. So that was what, about a little over 6 decibel drop, which is pretty substantial. I think we could have gotten that to drop a little bit more if we wanted to put the dampener on the Z-axis, but there's been a lot of issues reported with that, so I did not. But also with that extra fan in there, that's something that you can't really do much about, so you do have to think about that a little bit as well. But I did want to make a note that even with all of that, the max recording, I think, was about 10 decibels lower than the max was before. So the high points are definitely much quieter. And what is it? For every 3 decibels is considered double the intensity, but takes, I think it was 10 decibels in order for you to perceive double the volume. So at that point, that 10 decibel jump is pretty much double volume at the high points. And then we're at about a 6 decibel drop on the just normal run rate, which is still pretty substantial. So I guess whether or not that's worth it to you, I mean, we did lose a little bit of build volume just because of the stepper motors and the stoppers. We had to make some adjustments there. So if you're trying to get the printer to be as quiet as possible, that's definitely something that you might want to consider. If you don't really care if it's just sitting over in the other room or something like that, I would not try to go this route. It's not worth the time or effort. There's a lot of changing things around, messing with the firmware, modifying some parts, and all of that, that if I wasn't trying to make it quieter so I can have it printing in the same room while I'm on a call, I wouldn't have even bothered with it, to be honest. But it is a noticeable difference just sitting right next to it, even not even looking at the readings. But it's really, what's that extra space worth to you, and what are you trying to accomplish? Hopefully you got some value out of this video. If you're looking to get it a little bit quieter, I would also look at putting some sort of foam pad or something, maybe like one of those 2x2 whatever, the foam pads that go together for the workout areas. That would also reduce the noise a little bit, because I am getting some vibration coming back through this counter, but I wanted to keep it consistent. Just from the test 1 to test 2. I also had to wait for the AC to turn back off too, because that wasn't on the first one. Like I mentioned, I am going to look for different spacers. If I find some that I think are better, I'll link to them in the description below. But there are 50 different ways to do this, so it's really work with what you think is best, and then most of the principles that we covered and the processes that we covered today are going to be the same regardless of what spacers you use. The install process will be the same. It's more going to be how do you actually screw the stepper motor in. So that's just something to be aware of, I guess. And then if I can find a spacer that would allow me to not need to move the Y stopper, I would definitely switch over to that, but I don't think we can. The bracket that's on the bottom of the actual build plate is hitting the actual stepper motor, so I don't think that there's anything we can actually do about that. So we'll just have to make sure that you adjust those steppers, and if you have the BL Touch unit, that you're putting the felt pads there or a rubber stopper or something. And also, I think I mentioned this earlier in the video, but I've been all over on this video today. If you end up going this route, make sure you update the firmware before you power it back on, because you don't want to potentially throw your throw anything off, because if you just powered it on and homed it, it would try to jump right off that end, and I don't know what damage that might cause. So just adding another warning here, make sure to update the firmware first, because it could be a bad day. Just checking these blocks here, they are staying cool, so the actual heat block is helping. If you guys have any questions or would like any more information on this process, or on whether or not you should consider doing this or not, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you have any better suggestions for the steppers or anything like that, also leave a comment below. I would really like your feedback. Thanks.